welcome back to Analysis, where we've been talking about the case of David Miranda and the government interception of highly classified Snowden documents at Heathrow last year. The use of Schedule 7 in this case has come in for intense criticism since its inception under the 2000 Terrorism Act. It was designed to detain suspected terrorists for up to 9 hours and confiscate materials without the need for regular stop and search requirements. And it's now being used against journalists. And many feel that this is a worrying development in its power and scope. Whilst the need to protect the public is difficult to dispute, should the use of Schedule 7 always be justified? And where do we draw the line? Rejoining me in the studio are some of my guests from the first half of the programme, Professor Bill Bowring and Masood Shajari from the Islamic Human Rights Commission, and Dr. Julian Richards, plus on the phone we now have also Mohammed Amin from the Conservative Muslim Forum. Welcome. Well, let me come to you, Bill Bowring. I mean, should this whole Schedule 7 thing be replaced by different legislation?
Yes, it's really thoroughly disproportionate and out of control. When one looks at the figures, if you bear with me for a second, these were presented by Liberty very recently, 2011 to 2012, 69,109 people were stopped and examined under the power, 2,240 held for more than an hour, 592 were required to provide biometric samples, that includes DNA, and a huge proportion of the people detained are Muslim, in point of fact. So that is actually what is going on.
How many of them roughly were charged with terrorism out of this almost 70,000 people? I mean, did they actually find anything that was warranted a criminal charge?
No. I mean, the thing is that this is a power which is being used by the authorities on a huge scale. And when one looks at the original wording, which I mentioned in the first half, the power to detain is in order to establish whether the person concerned appears to be a person who is or has been concerned in the commission, preparation or instigation of acts of terrorism. Now, any member of the public would understand that to mean somebody who is involved in acts of violence leading to the killing of people. One of the problems is that the definition of terrorism in the Terrorism Act 2000 is extraordinarily wide, as we were discussing, and can cover all manner of political protest, attempts to change the law, and so on. So there are those problems. In the background is the fact that Section 44 of the Terrorism Act was already held to be a violation of human rights by the European Court of Human Rights in 2010. Since then, the authorities have been using Schedule 7. Actually, there is another case at Strasbourg at the present moment, a case called Malik, where the government, later on this month, are going to be presenting their arguments, their observations on the case. The case has been found to be admissible. All of this actually goes to show how crucially important also the European Convention on Human Rights is, and the Human Rights Act, in protecting basic liberties in this country.
Well, Masood Shajari, I mean, I gather that many people, Muslims, when they go abroad, sort of allow themselves an extra hour or two to get through immigration because they know it's a very good chance they're going to be stopped for nothing except that they look Muslim or look Asian or look Pakistani or something.
Yes, I mean, the reality is that going through those security is actually quite daunting for all of us. We actually find it, difficult. It's quite a unnerving experience. But for the Muslim community, actually, this increases manyfold. And I even was told recently that some people putting a little cross on their neck to actually not be identified as Muslim, and they seem to think that it works. And that actually shows how ridiculous the procedures are, that just by merely putting a piece of metal on you or dressing up as a Sikh or anything else, you could actually just walk through and not be stopped. And this is the problem with profiling. But also I'm actually very concerned that people are being stopped for not according to the legislation, and the code of conduct I've personally experienced is not being practiced. I mean, I was stopped with my family, and the officer didn't even told us that we were being stopped under Schedule 7. And I said, is this under Schedule 7? He said, yes, how do you know? I said, I'll sit on the accountability board, which overlooks this power. And then he sort of said, well, we don't have to tell people is a Schedule 7 because terrorism people get scared. I said, look, according to the Code of Conduct, you're supposed to tell people. How would I know that I should actually answer every question? You could hold me up to 9 hours if you don't inform me which power you have used. And now, after complaining, the Metropolitan Police have turned around and say, I wasn't stopped under Schedule 7. The officers are actually lying. And if I wasn't stopped under Schedule 7, what I was stopped on, why did they took my passport and my family's passport, including a 9-year-old child, away to photocopy it, etc. And this is really how ridiculous and abusive this system has become.
Well, Mohammed Amin, you're from the Conservative Muslim Forum. I mean, do you think that the government should now be changing the law? In fact, I gather there is some talk of changing it. Do you think that they're going far enough?
There was a detailed public consultation about a year ago on Schedule 7, and I must confess I've lost track of whether the consultation or the Home Office has reported back after the consultation. I know that there was a consultation because I submitted a response to it. Did anybody in the audience, in the studio, know what came of the consultation, or whether the Home Office is still...
Well, maybe Julian Richards, would you know the answer to the question? Has the government brought in new legislation, or is it planning to?
Well, as I understand it, a number of measures have been put forward as a result of that consultation, and they are currently going through Parliament. And they include things like reducing the length of time that people can be held at the port, some extra training and accreditation for officers exercising those powers at the ports, and numerous other things. So I think there were results that came out of that, and they are churning their way slowly through Parliament.
Masood.
Yeah, I think this consultation was really, first of all, it was the first type of consultation I've seen at this level that it was a multiple choice. You actually choose, choices, and that is really not consultation. Experts were not really able to put forward real responses. But nevertheless, yes, there are some changes which have been recommended, but one of the changes that we were really saying that is essential was everything to be recorded. Now, Metropolitan Police is saying that it's not technically possible to record the encounter. Now, I find it very strange. Our soldiers are recording everything in the battlefield. We've got Metropolitan Police officers have got on their jackets recording material to record encounters in the streets of London, but we can't sort of record in the ports and airports. The reason they don't want to do it is because there is abuses are taking place. The sort of questioning how many times you pray, which mosque you go to, indeed who you voted for in the last election, are the sort of abuses that are norm rather than exception.
Well, let me put that point to Dr. Julian Richards. I mean, is that a legitimate question to ask somebody how they voted?
I wouldn't have thought so. No, I mean, none of us are experts on how exactly these things are carried out, which things from the consultation were accepted and which weren't. I just that question about whether things could be recorded or not. I mean, to me, that sounds like an entirely sensible proposal to make, and I don't know why that wasn't adopted. It may be just a technical thing that would require quite a lot of resource to do that. No, I mean, personally, I don't think it's relevant to ask somebody how they voted.
And Mohammed Amin, what's your view on that? I mean, do you think the questioning is going too far and asking things that are really improper?
I'm very surprised that police officers at airports feel entitled to ask people how they voted. I mean, my own name actually is on one of the American lists because I must have the same name as some suspected terrorists. So most of the time when I travel internationally, I also take extra time going through, although not with UK immigration or emigration. But normally it involves, in my case, sitting around for an extra half hour or so while people think about about it, and then they let me go through. The key thing about Schedule 7, as was clear from the 32-page judgment in the Miranda case, is that people going through airport and UK borders is different from people on the streets of London, which is the logical justification for having wider powers of stopping, detaining and questioning than we have for the streets of London. So there are the requirements for Schedule 7 are much less onerous than they are for stopping a citizen anywhere in the United Kingdom. But that's because you are crossing an international border, and it's a way of actually trying as best as we can to keep ourselves secure. Because remember, we are balancing two separate issues here. We're balancing the rights of the individual, but also balancing the security of society.
Well, Masood, let me come on to you about this racial profiling thing. I mean, just today, 4 people have been arrested in connection with Syrian-related terrorism. I think that's what they've said. I mean, we don't want to go into the detail of the case, obviously. But, I mean, if somebody's flying from Istanbul back to London and they, quotes, look as though they're Asian, Pakistani or something of that kind in appearance, isn't it reasonable for the police to think, well, maybe this person has come back from being, helping the jihadi terrorists in Syria? Because they're on a flight from Istanbul, and that's where people normally go into Syria from.
No, it isn't, because by any definition, what is being reported is 200 out of 4 million Muslims might be involved in those acts. You can't stop every single Muslim because of, 200
no,
of them.
but on a flight from Istanbul to London.
But people go to Istanbul in huge numbers, and also it's not just from Istanbul. People are being stopped from other airports because, let's face it, those people who want to be involved in that sort of unsavory exercises, they don't fly directly now. They will go different places. They use different passports and so forth. But what really happens at the end of the day, I think the issue is that, we need to exercise these sort of powers in a way that ordinary people will identify that, yes, this is right and just. When I get to stop, and I did get to stop, and the case is going through judicial review now, that, they asked me questions regarding sort of Arab Spring in Egypt. And I tell them that, look, what this got to do with terrorism? And they said, oh, nothing, but we are finding it interesting having a chat with you. I'm sorry, this is abusive of my intelligence, but also abusive of the power. I think ordinary people, be it Muslim or non-Muslim, understand that there is an issue of security. But how they go about it, how they actually stop abusing their powers, is actually the way forward. And unfortunately, what is happening, what I said regarding voting, I mean, can you imagine if you refuse to answer who you voted for, you get 3 months imprisonment. This is outrageous. I mean, you should put the shiver in our spine. And this question, we find that was at one time systematically asked of everyone they stopped.
No, but I can understand what you're saying, that there is abuse, but the idea that police should be able to question people about where they've come from and what they've been doing, isn't there something reasonable about that? I mean, obviously, if somebody's involved in terrorism, they're not going to advertise saying, I am a terrorist. So the police have to, act on some kind of suspicion or reasonable.
Yes, there are
something.
2 words missing from the present legislation. They are reasonable suspicion. Because when the police stop you to question you, arrest you, or anything else, in any other circumstance, there has to be reasonable suspicion. Here, there is the very broad power that we've referred to, which is if the official thinks you appear to be, what on earth that means. Now, what does this mean in practice? It means that actually people coming back from Istanbul, let's say, the power to stop and question them should arise if there's reasonable suspicion. That is, if some intelligence has been gathered showing that this is a person who's been involved in whatever it is. And that I think, would be the expectation that the authorities, who have enormous powers, as a matter of fact, of intelligence gathering, getting information on people, would have a reasonable suspicion, which they could back up, that this is a person in some way involved in terrorism under the Terrorism Act. So reasonable suspicion, those are the words which have to go into any legislation.
Okay, but what would you advise the best way to do this is? If there is going to be any kind of stopping at the airport, are you saying there should be no stopping at the airport? But if you're saying yes, there should be, then what are the grounds for doing it?
A reasonable suspicion, that is, that there has to be some kind of evidence that the individual concerned, not simply because they look like a Muslim or look Asian or whatever it is, or happen to have come from Istanbul. There has to be something more than that by way of intelligence gathering. This is a person in respect of whom there is reasonable suspicion that they're involved in terrorism. And at the moment, that is completely lacking.
Let me give Julian Richards another chance to come in. I mean, you heard what was being said, that the reasonable suspicion point must be brought into any new legislation. Do you think that's correct?
Yeah, I wouldn't be totally unsympathetic to that. But as you've just implied, how do you define reasonable suspicion? You know, one person's reasonable suspicion is another person's autocratic, applying the law incorrectly. So that's difficult. A lot of these things are actually down to interpretation. And the second point is the point just made about you should always have intelligence leads before you can, concrete intelligence leads before you exercise these powers. Unfortunately, the nature of the threat and the size of the threat and the lack of intelligence that we have on it means that's just not really practical. If we only ever pulled aside people that we had really good intelligence on, we'd be doing it very, very rarely, and we'd also be opening ourselves up to really quite serious threats.
Well, Mohammed, I mean, you mentioned earlier that you sent in something to the consultation. We didn't actually hear from you, probably because I didn't ask you. What was in your recommendations? What did you tell the people?
I can't remember, but let me pick up on this reasonable suspicion point, because I actually disagree with what's being said. There are many cases where there may not be reasonable suspicion, but some level of stopping or interrogation is worthwhile. Let's take a simple example, first of all, away from terrorism for a moment. They can stop you at any stage if you're going through the Green Channel to check your suitcase to see if you've got goods that you haven't declared. And the knowledge that you may be stopped at random is actually quite a useful deterrent. Now, these Schedule 7 stops, the Home Office and the government as a whole is not in the business of deliberately wasting money. And every one of these stops and inquiries costs money. Clearly, the Home Office believes that the level of security enhancement that we're achieving by the use of Schedule 7 is worthwhile in terms of the money spent. And I think we should give some respect to that.
Well, Masood, I mean, that point, the random stopping can be a good technique, and it doesn't have to be abusive.
No, but you see, the point is this, that, let us go through the practice. In practice, most of the Schedule 7, around 90% of them, is when people are coming back. They've already gone through the experience of the airports. They got off their plane, and this power was brought in to stop acts of terrorism at ports and on the planes. And this guy is actually, just after this stop, is going to enter his own country and into Britain. He could be a stop and question on any time as regard as what he did or what he did not do. He could be searched for explosive or anything at any time through the custom sort of procedures. This guy is being stopped, not because there is any suspicion that he's going to be involved in imminent act of terrorism. It's actually a fishing exercise by the this fishing.
Because Schedule 7 can't be used for stopping anybody in the street.
Absolutely.
Only at the airport or the seaport.
It's misuse in the process of stopping hundreds and thousands of people when really shouldn't have been used. The act was brought in to make our airports and our planes safe, not to actually give people a right of fishing exercises.
Well, I think on that point, we'll have to bring the discussion to a close. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for this evening. So I'd like to thank all of my guests and, of course, you at home for watching. And please tune in for future episodes of Analysis. And don't forget that you can keep up with our conversation on Twitter @Islam Channel, capital I, capital C, capital A. or on Facebook at Islam Channel Current Affairs, or by emailing us on currentaffairs@islamchannel.tv. Thank you for watching.